All right, the next case to come before the court is State of Ohio versus Talisha Jones. Same as last time. Each party will have 15 minutes. Paul, you can let me know if you wish to reserve time for rebuttal, and if so, how much. We have read your briefs, and we are ready to proceed whenever you are.
Good morning again, Your Honors. I recall the appellant, Talisha Jones. I'd like to reserve 5 minutes of my time for rebuttal. Thank you. The appellant was charged with 3 counts of grand theft. The case went to trial. The jury found her guilty on 2 of 3 counts. 2 assignments of error, sufficiency of the evidence regarding those convictions, and manifest weight. What's interesting about this case is if you look at the conduct and actions of the appellant, I think what's clear is this is the person that, although a crime occurred, that she was not a willing participant. There's no evidence here that shows that she willingly committed this offense. She took this, she was basically set up by apparently a Mr. Burns, who asked her, this was a job that she go and obtain rent some type of heavy equipment. She was given a credit card and some other things. This took place in Brunswick at ABC Rental. At no time during this unfortunate incident did she ever try to conceal her identity. Okay, she went to ABC Rental. She told them what she wanted. She presented a valid identification. She presented a valid address. She presented a valid phone number. All this stuff was taken. She signed her name to a contract. Okay. That's hardly the actions of somebody who is intending on committing a theft offense. You'd likely give a false name, false identification, and a phone number that's not a good phone number or somebody else's phone number. The other issue is that the credit card that she uses was a valid credit card. It went through. And she was able to rent the equipment. What happened was apparently the equipment then was in possession of this other individual who was actually the offender in this case, Mr. Burns, that the rental went beyond the time period.
Well, how did the equipment get in the possession of the other individual? Your client testified, correct?
Yes, she did.
What did she do with the equipment when she left ABC?
I believe she took this. I believe that she was from New Jersey, and I believe that this was a long travel where I believe she attempted this on another occasion, and for some reason she wasn't able to do it. So, unfortunately for her, rather than end her this trip at that point, just go back home and call it a day, she continued to go on because she thought she was going to be paid at the end of the day. She received absolutely no remuneration for this, none whatsoever.
Well, she may have been victimized as part of the scam, but I don't want to say that's not what this case is about, because I realize what you're saying, but I guess my question is, she left ABC, she gave them a job site.
Right.
Did she take it to the job site?
No, she's not. And she had a rental comment, valid address, phone number, credit card went through. Once it became apparent to her that there's a problem with this, most people who committed offense would have I guess, a foxhole effect and made them so scarce or unavailable. She didn't. She continued to communicate with ABC Rental. She cooperated with the police, gave them all her information, kept in contact, gave them the information from Mr. Burns, the person who set her up in this case, Your Honors. If Ms. Jones, if the appellant is guilty of anything in this case, what she is guilty of is being extremely naive and extremely gullible, Your Honors. That she looked at something that she thought was an easy job, you could work for yourself almost, you're on your own, all you have to do is pick up some equipment, here's the credit card, here's all the information you need, and then when you get back, you're going to get paid. A lot of people would have questioned this, Your Honor. She's not one of those people. She didn't question it. She thought this was something that was too good to be true, and she fell for it, Your Honors. And as a result, she was convicted, and and she spent 180 days in the Medina County Jail as a result of this. The real culprit in this case is Mr. Burns, who was smart enough to keep himself in the background and out of the picture the whole time. And obviously, he's somebody who's obviously probably done this before, and he's somewhat sophisticated. And he picked somebody, Ms. Jones, the appellant, who was unsophisticated and just didn't see through this, that this was something that obviously was a scam, and that there were warning signs throughout the case. And I think the jurors looked at that, and I think when the state tried this case, they were able to point out these things to people on the jury, and the people on the jury were probably maybe were more sophisticated, more reasonable, and said, listen, I would never do anything like this, but that's not who Ms. Jones is. And that's what happened to her in this case. I would ask the court to reverse that conviction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning again, Your Honors. Vince Bellucci with the Medina County Prosecutor's Office for the appellee, State of Ohio. Ms. Jones was convicted on counts 2 and 3 of the indictment, which charged grand theft 2 different ways. It's beyond the scope of consent and also by deception. On both counts, the first thing I would note is the value of the equipment, which the manager, Mr. Zadek of ABC Equipment, testified that this boom, this tow boom that Jones rented is worth $35,000 to $40,000. So that established the value on both counts. Mr. Zadek testified that in February of 2018, Jones came in, rented this tow boom, and he rented it to her. And she stated that she was with a company called Sunbright Construction, which Jones said had a job site in Avon, Ohio, at an address that she provided to Mr. Zadek. 4 days later, Officer Milford from Brunswick PD is being called to ABC after Mr. Zadek is reporting that the boom was never returned. The credit card that Jones had given to Mr. Zadek had stopped working after the 3rd day, and there was a chargeback done for the 2nd and 3rd days, so ultimately he was only paid for the 1st day. So as the card began being declined, Mr. Zadek began actually speaking with Ms. Jones on the phone to try to figure out what was going on. Jones initially gave the name of someone named Rob, or Bob was the testimony, and provided his phone number. So Mr. Zadek actually calls that number, and Rob, or whoever it is on the other end of the line, hangs up on him, says he doesn't know what Mr. Zadek is talking about. Then Mr. Zadek calls Jones back, and they have a very revealing conversation where Mr. Zadek testifies, Jones said they were playing a game or something to that effect. That's how she first phrased it. Then Mr. Zadek asked her point blank, are they trying to steal his equipment? And Ms. Jones clearly says, yes, that's what they're doing.
Did they recover the equipment?
No, it was never recovered. And Mr. Zadek then tries to call this Rob or Bob several more times and keeps getting hung up on every time. So it didn't take long for Officer Milford to figure out in his investigation that Sunbright Construction did not even exist. There was never any job site in Avon. That was completely false. After learning that, Officer Milford actually got a hold of Jones by phone, and he had a long conversation on the phone with her. And during that conversation, Jones admitted that she participated in what she called a scam. She admitted that she gave ABC Equipment false information, admitted there was never a job in Avon. So when she says at trial, oh, I didn't know any of these things, well, she told Officer Milford on the phone during the investigation that that's exactly what she did, and she knew that. Jones, and I think this is the most important point in the whole case, Jones told Officer Milford she drove ABC's boom straight back to Detroit after she rented it. Didn't even stop in Avon, do not pass go, do not collect $200, straight back to Detroit. So I think that's a critical fact, showing that Jones knew exactly what was going on the whole time. She wasn't being duped. If she was, she would have gone to Avon. She was in on this. And in terms of, the argument that she would never have communicated with any of these people if she was truly guilty, I don't buy that. What she was doing is attempting to blame all this on somebody else and deflect her guilt onto other people. So the idea that the average person just wouldn't communicate at all, I don't know that that's true. I think she was trying to get herself out of this and just claim after the fact that she didn't have any knowledge of it. So I think given all of that, a rational jury could easily conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that the purpose Jones had here was to deprive ABC of its equipment. I think a rational jury could easily conclude that Jones knowingly obtained, exerted control over the boom beyond the scope of ABC's consent. As I said, Jones drove the boom straight to Detroit, never returned it, never paid for it after the first day. That was beyond the scope of their consent. The deception, I think, is also compelling. Jones admitted on more than one occasion that to get the boom, she gave false information about who she worked for. She gave false information about where the boom was going. Mr. Zadig never would have rented her that boom if he knew she was going to drive straight back to Detroit with it. Jones admitted more than once that this was all a scam, and a rational jury could easily conclude that Ms. Jones was a knowing participant in this scam, not an innocent victim. I think in terms of the manifest weight, Jones did have some witnesses testify in her defense. None of them really helped her case. One of the witnesses was actually the owner of ABC Equipment, Mr. Zadig Sr., and he only provided just further details that supported the state's case at trial. There was a woman named Talisha Reeves who testified for Jones, and she testified she'd been Jones's friend since elementary school, which right off the bat, you question her neutrality and all this, but she testified that she introduced Jones to someone named James to do this job because she wasn't able, for some reason, to do the job herself. At no point did Ms. Reeves, though, testify that Jones didn't know this was a scam or give any testimony to that effect or to support that. There was a private investigator who I was very confused reading the transcript as to what his testimony did at all that was remotely relevant to this case. Jones did testify in her own defense as well and made some important admissions on the stand. I think she harmed her case with her own testimony. She claimed she didn't remember telling ABC that she worked for this Sunbright Construction, this made-up company, but she couldn't think of any reason why Mr. Zadig would lie about that. So she wasn't exactly denying it, and she couldn't deny it because it was in writing. There was a Sunbright Construction was written right on her customer form on the records for ABC. She couldn't explain why it would be on there otherwise. So she admitted on the stand that she told Officer Milford this was all a scam. So she reaffirmed that again. So even if the jury could reasonably choose between these two versions of events, Jones's conviction couldn't be against the manifest weight just because the jury decided to credit the state over her. But as I mentioned, the evidence actually weighed in favor heavily of Jones's convictions when you consider all of the evidence. There's nothing further. ask this court to affirm the judgment of the trial court. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honors. The statements that Ms. Jones made to the police after the credit card would not go through any longer, these statements were not a confession, Your Honors. There was a realization that she had been set up, she had been hacked. Once again, she was providing information, evidence to the police to try to exonerate herself because she felt that she'd been taken advantage of. She told them everything that she knew about the case. It's interesting to note that the boom itself was never recovered. It was not in her possession. There was never an issue of her receiving any payment for this. She was supposed to be receiving, I believe she was received $300 for all of her troubles, which amounted to quite a lot of trouble in this case. As far as deception, I'm trying to think that she gave her information. She wasn't deceptive. Gave addresses, everything where the police could find her. So if you're committing a crime, and at some point in time, if you're a part of this scheme, this elaborate scheme to rent this vehicle, rent this equipment for one day, and it's not going to go forward to be stolen, you certainly wouldn't want to leave a paper trail and all this information as to where I can be found and located and contacted. You want to do exactly the opposite. Even the most unsophisticated criminal would do that. They certainly wouldn't have, if they're unsophisticated, they wouldn't answer the phone. Mr. Burns, on the other hand, knew exactly what to do. To hang up on everybody, not to cooperate, not to communicate any longer, and to disappear, along with the total and whatever money he was able to get from that, which is probably significant. Once again, Your Honors, my client was taken advantage of. I think the evidence shows that clearly she wasn't deceptive about this, naive, gullible, I'm going to use the word ignorant, but that's what happened in this case. I'm going to ask the court to reverse the conviction.
All right. Thank you both for your presentations. Court will take the matter under advisement and issue a written decision, which will be mailed to both sides and posted on our website as well as that of the Supreme Court.